Uncomfortable, unsafe, intimidated, upset.
Business owners in Auckland CBD are pleading for a greater police presence as crime gets out of control. A number of businesses have come forward with worries about lawlessness in the city and say customers are keeping away as they fear for their safety.
For the first time, One New Zealand, formerly Vodafone, is speaking out about the crime and aggression its in-store staff are experiencing weekly. It got so bad in downtown Auckland, the company decided to close the store, and it's still paying the rent.
A government agency is moving out of Auckland City because its staff members don't feel safe there. Stats New Zealand won't renew its lease on the Grays Avenue building where staff have reported antisocial behaviour on the street and around the entrance to the office.
Central City Aucklanders have told the Police Minister they don't feel safe and they want more officers on the beat as well as a downtown police station.
Central Auckland business owners say criminals are harassing their staff, stealing their purses and scaring customers away. The level of crime in the CBD is so bad, one restaurateur is now making his staff walk to their cars together because he fears for their safety.
These headlines have run rampant over the news recently. While
Police Area Commander Grant Tetzlaff says reported crime in the Auckland CBD area has been growing over recent years, but has plateaued in the last 6 months.
Kia ora, I'm Tom Kitchen, and today on The Detail, what's changed in cities like Auckland? Is it a real problem or a perception? And how can we really make cities safer?
My name's Viv Beck. I'm Chief Executive of Heart of the City, and we're the business association for the city centre in Auckland.
There are a few headlines that have been in the news recently that aren't too positive, shall I say. How does that make you feel?
In one level, it's quite devastating, I have to say, particularly because we've seen a significant change since COVID in the environment of the city centre. I think if there'd been action sooner, we could have avoided it getting to this point.
Well, let's talk about where the cities come from and why we have this perception, why many have this perception of what it's like at the moment. So you say it changed during COVID. How and why?
Well, the demographic changed. We lost 90% of our customer-facing trading overnight. We lost major events. 130-odd thousand people went home to work, and we lost international students and tourists. I mean, it was a massive impact. I lived and worked through it. I could see it with my very own eyes. Initially, through those lockdown periods, crime actually dropped. It was sort of went up and down, and then it sort of took off, and we tracked it, and we recognised that we first and foremost for crime needed more police, a stronger presence on the street, and we actually tried to get things like pop-up police stations and things. And in fact, this morning I heard one clip where the police commissioner said that the city centres had been deserted, abandoned, I think was the word, through COVID.
What's your view of downtown Auckland, downtown New Zealand generally, and whether we're getting on top of any of this?
Yeah, we're starting from a long way back, obviously. We basically abandoned our town centres during COVID.
Now, that was the first time I've heard an acknowledgement from someone in a position like that is what happened. We've been saying it for nearly, 4 years now, since early in COVID. We recognised we needed more police. We could see there were social issues, and that was mental health, addiction, and people needed specialist help. And we could also see the influx of emergency housing, and that needed to be managed better, and people needed wraparound support, and we needed to consider impacts on other tenants. So that was something we lobbied for early on. It hasn't happened in the way we hoped, but it's important what happens from now.
So COVID obviously had the huge impact, and then there was more emergency housing that came into the city, more public housing. I'm thinking, Te Matawai, which is the big Kāinga Order apartment complex on Grays Avenue. So how did that change, that public housing and that emergency housing change how people felt about the city or people's safety?
Well, it changed the demographic. And one of the things that we could see before COVID, we were quite actively involved in support of the Housing First initiative, which actually placed rough sleepers thoughtfully in housing they were comfortable in and put tailor-made services around them for their particular needs.
Housing First is a permanent supportive housing program. It's a program that provides both housing and support services to people who are homeless.
And that worked really well. We'd seen 200 rough sleepers housed in mostly private accommodation with a 97% tenancy maintained. So that was working really well pre-COVID. What we could see was that people were literally put into apartments and without consideration or thought or care for either whether it was the right environment for them or the other people with them. And we could see it early on that was an issue. And it did manifest with, and I'm not saying every person in housing has an issue, I'm not saying that at all, but we had a different demographic on the streets, and I could see it myself. In fact, last year I OIA'd the housing to see whether that was changing, the emergency and transitional and now public housing, the permanent housing. And there has been a change and a recognition that wasn't. In one level, it was good because it was a pandemic and it got people off the street in a hurry, but it clearly wasn't the right model to leave in place for so long. The issue now I'm actually more concerned about is we do have a lot of public housing in a close proximity, and other countries from what we have, and this is not our expertise, but I've had to learn lots about different things through this period. But we can see that in other countries, it's more thoughtful placement. And that, because we've got some people in very small apartments with no amenity, which means that they're coming out onto the street because, they're looking to congregate with others. And those are the sort of things can also add to a sense of unease for people.
We'll come back to Viv shortly. But first, is the city centre the right place for large concentrations of public housing? Brooke Stanley is a coordinator for Auckland Action Against Poverty.
I think wherever we can have public housing that addresses the need for people that don't have housing is good. I don't particularly see an issue whether it's in the city or in the suburbs. I think more public housing is good for all of us.
So we need this kind of space because we have these homelessness issues that are really kind of prevalent in the city and in the centre of town.
Yes.
Do you feel like there's the support services required for, public housing and social housing in the city centre? That
there are services there to meet the needs that are required for our homeless whānau.
Yes.
I think, yes, there are the social services that are there. I'm kind of unsure as to what the issue is. I think it's more around perception of safety. And people not feeling safe because we have homeless whānau in the city. But, I'm not sure what Aotearoa New Zealand people think we're living in. We have a homeless problem. We have a poverty problem, actually. And so, of course, we're going to have these things unless we address these things in meaningful ways to look at, eliminating poverty, ensuring that housing is a human right, that we build more public housing and ensure that there's more support going into wraparound services for people and families in these communities, then we won't have this perception of an issue with public safety. Because I know that there has also been a decrease in crime reported in the Auckland Central area as well.
Back to Viv Beck. What are businesses telling her?
Some people are still having a very difficult time in terms of crime. 85% of our crime in the central city is theft and burglary, so theft is pretty devastating for retail businesses, for example. There's also a lot of antisocial behaviour which is affecting residents, businesses and people on the street. So it's a combination of things and it varies depending on who you talk to.
But police say that crime has gone down recently. Do you agree with that?
We've tracked it pretty closely and it has been trending down in recent months. That's true. It spiked, had the biggest spike I think in early 23 and the trend has been coming down. It's had spikes since then, but over the last 6 months or so the trend has been down. So that's true.
In January 2023, the police recorded 1,175 victimisations in the central city. So that includes robberies, burglaries, assaults, abductions, the works. In April this year, the number was down to 636, which is still more than 20 incidents every single day.
It's also true that the police have, in our view, become more active in the central city, particularly over the last 6 months. We've worked with police closely throughout COVID, and I do want to acknowledge that they do some very good work. We just think they're under-resourced, given the number of people we have here every week. But they have been more active. I think the number of foot patrol figure that's given is, I think you have to recognise that's off a low base, but it does appear to us that we are seeing more police on the street than we were. We need to see more. We believe we need a lot more police for the number of people we have here. But it is fair to say that they have stepped up.
But yeah, so if crime is going down, is on the trend down, why are we getting so many people worried and having these terrible stories about the fear they're having in their
Well,
business?
it's still high. It's still above where we were before COVID, according to the figures I've got. I think also there is antisocial behaviour. So it's a combination of the two, and I'm not necessarily saying one conflates with the other, but some people might be having a lot of theft, other people might be facing abuse and unacceptable behaviour, and it sort of all merges into people feeling unsafe and concerned. But I think we still have more crime than we should have. Pre-COVID, we didn't have to spend $1.3 million on security. We were able to rely on police. A city's never going to be perfect. People understand it's a city. There is crime. There is activity that perhaps you might prefer not to have. But the reality is, before COVID, that's a measure for us. We relied on police, and we relied on Auckland Council's City Watch service, which we part fund, to enforce their local public safety and nuisance bylaw.
There was a meeting on Tuesday night with the Police Minister, Mark Mitchell, in central Auckland, where a lot of businesses expressed their concerns.
More than 100 people packed out a law and order meeting with Mark Mitchell last night. He says the number of police patrols has gone up by almost 60% in the last 6 months. This man, though, says he doesn't believe it.
I've been to New York, Seattle, Sydney, and every street you're on, even if there's no police, they park a police car so that other people know there are police.
You were there?
Yes.
What was that meeting like?
I think it was actually a good discussion. I think people did air concerns, which I think is important that they can do. I think, to be fair to the Minister, he acknowledged the things that certainly we've been lobbying for, the need for more police, the need for a downtown presence, the need for mental health and addiction services that are separate from police, because they've been spending a lot of time on things that ideally they would be freed up from, and the importance of the placement of housing and wraparound support for people who need it. So from our perspective, he acknowledged that.
Did you have any belief that it'll actually do anything?
I think it has to.
People have been talking about crime sprees and their fear of going to downtowns for quite a long time.
Tim Welch is a senior lecturer in urban planning at the University of Auckland. He says the flight of city dwellers to suburban sections from about the 1960s left cities worldwide donut-shaped.
They hollowed out in the middle. There wasn't a lot there except for jobs. And so once 5 o'clock hit and everybody rushed home to the suburban house, there wasn't a lot going on. It got really quiet, and it created a lot of opportunities, some would say, for crime to occur. And at the very least, it became a less interesting place and had a bigger feeling of danger in those cities. And so that kind of just has kept going over time as our suburbs have increased.
One solution is called Eyes on the Street, where shop owners and inner city dwellers watch out for each other so everyone feels safe.
And that encourages more people to be downtown and to interact downtown, and that encourages more commerce, more people to move there. And that density and variety of people will keep the neighborhood safe. And so that's kind of been one of the themes on urban safety and an urban environment that's held for a number of years.
So that's the overall theory, Tim. What does that look like in practice?
In practice, that means building places for people to live, and then also having the services available for them in our downtowns. So we often refer to places like Auckland, the central city, as the CBD. And that's a bit of a misnomer. I mean, calling it the central business district assumes that that's all that happens down there is business. But great downtowns have lots of people living there as well. So we need more affordable residences. And that's not just apartments, but townhouses, houses on small blocks. We also need better schools and more of them, more parks available. So lots of opportunities, all the things that attract people to suburban life, we need to see in our downtowns. That we need spaces for people to hang out, to relax, to be able to interact with each other. That's not just on the footpaths, but also in a casual environment and a place that people can take pride in. One of the things that really comes down to is building our cities at a human scale. So when we see a big high-rise building, all too often it's surrounded by glass and a big plaza. It's hard to interact with. There's not much going on. That space is really dead. You have to go inside the building to start to interact with that building. It's really not contributing anything to the human eye level of that streetscape. So thinking about how people interact with our streets and building at a scale where we see shops at the street level and residents above those shops where people can live is a really critical component to begin with. So places where people feel like they're at home, they're not just surrounded by giant glass buildings is really important. It's something most cities have done a bad job of because they typically look for those huge buildings as a marker of building their skyline, but building at a lower scale. And that also means that housing can be at that scale. Certainly wider footpaths, better facilities to ride bikes on that connect you to things, better public transportation, all of those things that get us outside of the building, outside of our metal boxes of cars and onto the streets interacting with each other are really important.
Then another idea.
In 1982, in The Atlantic, a couple of sociologists, George Kelly and James Wilson, wrote a very controversial and influential article called Broken Windows.
Broken windows, graffiti, drunkenness, and open displays of unfettered sexuality are an invitation for crime, a declaration that the environment is uncontrolled and uncontrollable.
And the theory was the idea that a single broken window on a building, unfixed, will lead to multiple broken windows. And in theory, the whole neighborhood would decline. So in New York City in the 1980s and 90s, as the crack epidemic was kind of taking hold and crime was escalating, they really essentially did was they put police on every corner and tried to crack down on even very small crimes under the theory that one crime in an urban space that wasn't addressed would lead to major crimes. And so what we have there is an issue of overcompensating for fairly minor incidents and escalating to the point where we kind of have an overabundance of police and we're ignoring a lot of the things that would actually make a city a better place. But unfortunately, the broken windows theory has really replaced a lot of the ideas of density and diversity in our urban centers. So, the problem is that with broken windows theory is the way that it was implemented with just more police on the streets and really controversial things like stop and frisk. So they could randomly stop anybody on the street and see if they were carrying a weapon or drugs.
To some blacks and Latinos, it's naked racial profiling, with them as the targets of an occupying force.
I remember them banging my head into this.
And it really created an uninviting urban environment. So there were a lot of other things that were happening, let's say in New York City, that reduced the number of violent crimes over time, but because those reductions did occur during the time that these broken window theories were being tried out. They got a lot of credit for solving it. They've since been discredited in criminology and sociology. Most people don't follow those theories anymore, but they still have a lot of credence with police offices and with citizens because they seem intuitively to make sense, but they're really not that true in practice.
You've also talked about there being a bit of a moral panic around crime and a bit of a frenzy that might be stirred up by the media. Police have said recently that crime has fallen in the city, but people aren't feeling that. That's not what we're seeing in the news, right?
So the number of crimes, whether violent or property crimes, have not gone up, but yet the number of reports we see in the media have gone up. A lot of, if you read the media reports, they focus on individual stories of someone having, their purse stolen.
We have had some of our staff, as they walked to their car, their purse was taken from them, and the person just ran off.
Suffering from some shoplifting or something.
I've had people try to break in, just smash the doors, did a lot of damage, grabbed some things, and ran off again.
Those things do happen. They're always going to happen. But we often see that a small number of these crimes occur, and then they get reported in the media, and that kind of feeds a frenzy of more media reporting, more sensationalization. And when we get to that point, what happens is we start to see these images, not just in the media, but in social media as well. So we see it on TikTok, we see it on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere else we go. And we start to get that feeling like, okay, maybe the city is a lot more dangerous than I thought. And that can repel people from the city as well. But it also leads to an overreaction at the policy level. So often the first step is to put a lot more police on the street, which typically doesn't do a significant amount to deter crime. It's a presence. It feels like it's better. But then also at the policy level, we start to overreact. This is what happened in New York in the 90s with kind of implementing the broken windows theory again there. And so our policies just go way overboard to address a crime wave that never really happened. And those policies can last for years and years and have a big impact on people when they were never really addressing anything to be concerned with in the first place.
And Viv Beck acknowledges more police isn't the only answer.
It's definitely a combination. This is a health response around the mental health and addiction. This is a housing response around the public housing and transitional and emergency housing. No, it's definitely not police. It's got to be cross-agency, and we made that point very early in COVID.
One thing I feel like we haven't talked about is the kind of idea of reimagining or redesigning a city so it's more welcoming for people.
Yeah.
Bringing people back into the city, a 24-hour city, apartments, lighter, brighter areas, larger walkways, bigger footpaths. So we have a congregation of people in what looks like a safe place.
That's the goal. That's the vision. And we support the vision. Absolutely. The execution of the vision has been incredibly challenging. So if you think about it, we've had nearly a decade of construction to build this transformed place. We've had COVID, with the convention centre burned down. We've had the residual impacts of COVID, and the cost of living has really affected the place a lot. Our vision is by the time that city rail link opens, we are a vibrant 24/7, safe, accessible international city.
That's it for today. The Detail is funded through RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Ben Pearce and produced by Alexia Russell with Davina Zimmer. Thanks to Viv Beck, Brooke Stanley and Tim Welch. I'm Tom Kitchen. Mā te wā.